So now let's look at choosing one of your NFTs as your persona to chat under. Again, we've got our room loaded here with our title and our chat section down below, but we want to have a section in the middle where all of the NFTs are loaded that you can pick from. So let's set that up. We've got our grid list here that's going to load these. And so in our page load, we want to trigger this functionality. So what we're going to add here is an API call. And this is going to be another API call to OpenSea. And if we go to the API docs here, we can see we want to get retrieving assets. So this will pull the list of assets that the owner has, and we're going to pass a detail to it, which is the collection. So we want to send this collection, and it says that it's a collection slug that we pass to it to tell it, here's the collection we want to get the assets for. And if we go back to our collections and take a look, and let's just do a sample call ID and take a look at the data here, we'll see the collection slug right here. So that's the key, is just slug, and that's what we want to use. So on our API call, let's grab the endpoint for assets and copy that, and we'll paste that in here. And for our parameters, we know we need the owner, which is going to be from a variable on the root page. And let's take a look at what we called that variable. MetaMask wallet ID. All right. So owner MetaMask wallet ID is the value. And then we want to send the collection slug, and I'm going to set that in a variable the same way I did the other selected details of our chosen room. So here we created selected room name and selected room image. I'm going to duplicate this, and we will just call this selected room slug, and the value here is just slug, as we just looked at. So now back in our API call, we can add a new parameter, and we'll call this collection, and it'll be from a variable on the root page. Selected room slug is our value. Now, how we want to handle this response, we want to save this in a variable on the current page, and we'll just call this assets. This is the only place that we're going to use that, at least right now. So we'll call that assets, and we'll be able to pull from that in our grid list. So to do that, we're going to add another action, set value. And the element that we want to set the value for is our grid list that's under chatting as. So we'll use that grid list, and the variable that we just looked at is on the current page, and it's called assets. And that will load that data into our grid list. And then we can go into our asset card and set the image and name. So let's look at the assets endpoint, and let's put in our MetaMask ID. I'm just going to grab that. So if we put this in and run it, we'll see this is what the assets object looks like. It actually returns, this response returns an object called assets. So we're going to have to input that as well. But if we look for what we want to use, we see here we have an image URL for each asset and we have a name. So we will we'll use those to pull that into our asset card. So here on our element value, we want to add the path assets so that we can access that first object that's returned. Now in our card for our asset, remember we have an image and we have a name. We're going to set the image source to a URL, and under data we'll say from a variable, and this variable was called image URL, and the name will be from a variable and it's just called name. So now we've told it where to pull this information from, and we've got an action in our onload. Wrong page. We've got an action here in our onload that will make the API call and then set the value into the grid list. So let's give this a shot. Refresh. I'm going to connect to MetaMask. Loading my rooms. There are my rooms here. And let's select one. And now we see not only do we have our header and the room name, but now we see our tokens. So this will allow me to pick one of these to chat as. So a couple of small changes I want to make here. I want to move the back button up to the top. I actually don't like it being below the image, but that's minor. And then I also want to hide this chat functionality until you've selected one of these assets. Once you select those, then I'll show the chat functionality down below. So let's do that, and let's give a way for you to click on one of these tokens and for that to set your selected asset as a variable. So first things first, this back button, I'm just moving that up to the top. And then the chat input, I'm going to start this out as hidden. Okay, so now that's hidden. Now on our asset card, we want to be able to click and trigger an event. So let's add an on click on this div, and the click will be a new flow, and we'll call it set selected asset. And there's going to be a couple things we want to do in here. So we want to set some variables. So let's set a variable called, and let's do this on the root page, and we'll call it asset ID. And the value will be from this current page, which is loading our asset object, and we're just going to pull the ID from that. And then I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times so that I can set some more variables. So let's load a couple more. So this one's going to be called asset name, and the variable is just name. Again, we can see that in our API docs. We're going to set a variable called collection slug. And the path for this one is a little bit different. If we look at our results, there is a collection object, and then under that is a slug. So we are going to say collection.slug. let's make another one for our image. And this one we'll just call asset image. And it's our image URL, which is the same thing that's being loaded from loaded here into our thumbnail. So now we've got some variables that we can use in different places. I also want to set up a flow on this page where I can show this chat input that I can trigger. So let's call this show chat input, a new flow. And the action here will just be to show it because it's hidden by default. And now in here, in my set selected asset, I can call that. So run flow on page. The page will be the parent. And the variable name, the page is room detail, we called it. And the action is show chat input. So that should show the chat. Once we select that, let's test that out real quick. Connect to MetaMask, select my collection, see my back buttons up at the top. Let's click on any one of these, and there's our chat. Perfect. So now it's displayed, and we have the ability to select our assets. The last thing I'm going to do, I always like to just set this to cursor pointer, again, so that there's a visual feedback for the user that lets them know that these assets are clickable. All right, let's just test that out real quick. Connect. There we go. You can see those are clickable, and we select one and it shows the chat. All right, so now we have the ability to choose one of these NFTs. We're storing it in the variable. We'll be able to see it in the next step when we add the chat functionality. So I'll catch you in the next video, and we'll move on to the chat functionality.